Coming up, the Knicks blow out the Warriors and the Wizards upset the Suns. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA, local experts going over the biggest stories on the hardwood. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. We're ready to recap all of the action for you from yesterday across the NBA. We started with the champs who have struggled on the road all season long, and the Knicks made sure those problems continued with a drubbing of the defending champs yesterday. Locked On Knicks and Locked On Warriors are in to go over the lopsided affair.
The New York Knicks are winners of 8 straight games after beating the Golden State Warriors by almost 40 points at home. Alex Wolf from Locked On Knicks here. Look, put whatever caveats you want on it. The Warriors was without Steph Curry, without Andrew Wiggins. Of course, those are 2 huge losses, but the Knicks have lost to far worse teams than the defending champs without those 2 players. And lost to them this season, no less. So this is still an accomplishment. The fact that the Knicks are beating this team by almost 40 points right now. They are firing on all cylinders. They're closing out on everything on defense. They're playing extremely unselfish on offense. And perhaps most importantly, their threes are starting to drop. They were previously one of, if not the worst team in the league in 3-point percentage at times this season. Slowly but surely, they're creeping up in those rankings and making more. So there's lots to talk about, lots to be happy about with the Knicks right now. We'll have more on Locked On Knicks.
Well, the Warriors' 8-game winning streak at Madison Square Garden is snapped. I'm Cyrus Sotzes with your Locked On Warriors, Locked On Now recap of the Golden State Warriors' road woes continuing, this time at Madison Square Garden, once considered friendly confines for the team, but tonight they got thumped. 132-94, the final score, as the Warriors now fall 2 games below 500 at the 32-game mark of the season, and they continue to have the worst road record in the entire NBA. There were no bright spots in this game, folks, save for maybe Jordan Poole. The Poole party scored 26 points tonight, but that was about it. Jonathan Kuminga, the young rising potential star, did have 13 points, but otherwise it was abysmal. The Warriors road trip continues tomorrow in Brooklyn. Follow the program on Twitter at Locked On Dubs.
A shorthanded Miami roster did not have much at home on Tuesday as they dropped their first game of the homestand against the Chicago Bulls. Locked On Heat is in to go over what went wrong.
Missing 60% of their starting lineup wound up dooming the Heat, who dropped a 10-point loss on Tuesday night to the Bulls. I'm David Ramil, the host of Locked On Heat. Miami had won 4 straight, while Chicago had lost 4 straight, so one streak had to end. Unfortunately for Miami, they were without Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, or Caleb Martin, so their chances were pretty bleak to begin with. The Heat did a good job of being aggressive in the first half, with Bam Adebayo leading the way and working well with Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, who had combined 28 points in the first half. But Chicago did a great job defensively in the third quarter, wreaking havoc with Adebayo's pick-and-roll attack and helping hold the Heat to just 20 points in the quarter. Defensively, the team was even worse, lacking communication as several bench players were forced into extended minutes, and it didn't help that Miami's switch-heavy defense was exploited regularly, particularly by the Bulls' Nikola Vucevic, who had 29 to lead all scorers. With Bam switching onto a guard and pick and roll, Vuce had easy looks in the low post over Miami's underside lineups, or was able to slip out to the perimeter for wide open looks from 3. Miami's 4-game homestand gets off to a rocky start. Can they bounce back to continue climbing up the Eastern Conference standings? Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Heat to find out, and for more details on tonight's game.
Coming up, a monster night from Ja Morant is not enough to take down the Nuggets. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by Bet Online. It's the #1 spot for all of your online sports gambling needs. If you want the latest live odds or bets, whatever you are interested in, you can do that at betonline.net. It's where the game starts. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. The Washington Wizards got the monkey off their back in a big way. They snapped a 10-game losing skid with an upset of the Phoenix Suns. Locked On Wizards goes over what helped Washington get back to winning.
What's good, everybody? It's your boy Brandon Scott from Locked On Wizards. No Kristaps Porzingis, no problem tonight for the Washington Wizards as they snap a 10-game losing streak, defeating the Phoenix Suns in Phoenix 113-110, led by 29 points from Kyle Kuzma, 27 points from Bradley Beal. And Bradley Beal was clutch in the fourth quarter. But what other factors helped the Wizards win tonight and snapping this 10-game losing streak? Well, they drove the lane, which led to open shooters. They pushed the pace. They forced turnovers, and in the process, got 9 steals. So this is a much-needed win for the Washington Wizards because, again, 10-game losing streak, but it doesn't get easier. Thursday night to go at Utah to face a very hot Utah Jazz team. So, again, the Wizards got a much-needed win tonight. Let's get it moving. Let's get a winning streak going. All right, everybody, have a good night. Peace.
Ja Morant dropped 35 from Memphis, but it was a full team effort from Denver that was the difference between the two best teams in the Western Conference. Locked On Grizzlies goes over everything for us post-game.
Ja Morant of the Memphis Grizzlies had a massive performance on Tuesday night, taking on the Denver Nuggets in Denver, but it was not enough as he essentially scored almost seemingly all the points for his team, whereas the Denver Nuggets had a surprising team performance. I'm Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies, and no Jamal Murray, no Michael Porter Jr. for the Denver Nuggets, and yet it was Denver that had all 5 starters in double figures. Nikola Jokic, a very impressive showing with 13 points, 13 assists, and 13 rebounds. But notice the points. He only scored 13. Aaron Gordon, Bruce Brown, other Nugget players contributed on the offensive end, whereas Ja Morant's 35 points on 26 shots looks impressive, a double-double with 10 assists, but no other Grizzlies starter other than Dillon Brooks scored 11 points, and that was on 14 shots for DB. Ja cannot do it alone. In this game, he was tasked with that, and we saw what the end result is when Morant doesn't have help.
A wild night for Lauri Markkanen from behind the arc helped Utah get an easy victory over the Detroit Pistons. Locked On Pistons has more on a tough one.
Well, at least Jane Ivey had a really good bounce-back game. Host of the Locked On Pistons podcast, Kuka Hill here. The Pistons have a pretty bad loss, to be honest, against the Utah Jazz, 126-111. Lauri Markkanen damn near dropped a 40-piece on him. He had 9 threes in this game. He was going absolutely berserk. But I mean, if you're going to take a positive out of this, Jaden Ivey finished with 30 points in this game. He's been struggling the last few weeks. He hadn't been closing fourth quarters the last 5 games. But this game, if it would have been a close game down the stretch, he would have closed in clutch moments for the Pistons because he was absolutely fantastic tonight. Again, 30 points, 10 of 14 from the field. He was hitting pull-up jumpers, was showing much more comfortability in the mid-range, in the in-between game. He looked really, really good tonight. So did Jalen Duren, another double-double for him. But 2 guys who really need to bounce back tomorrow night against the Philadelphia 76ers. Killian Hayes, Isaiah Stewart, both have had a really bad game against Utah. They need to bounce back with the Pistons. They're going to have a chance against the 76ers tomorrow.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure that you are subscribed to Locked On NBA and, of course, your favorite team's Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.